Welcome to Cancel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Hi, and welcome back to Cancel Culture. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Dana Denis-Smith OBE. She is a solicitor, entrepreneur, and a campaigner for gender equality in the legal profession. Dana is also the founder and CEO of Obelisk Support, a legal services business created to retain experienced lawyers, many of them women and carers, through high-quality, flexible, and remote legal work. In 2014, Dana also founded The First 100 Years, a national campaign and multimedia history project documenting and celebrating women's entry into the legal profession. The project culminated around the 2019 centenary and continues through the next 100 years, which focuses on accelerating equality for women in law, including initiatives that support future talent. Dana has been recognised with major industry honours for her impact, including an OBE for services to women in law. Dana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here.
We are going to be releasing this episode on Friday, as we usually do, which is just ahead of International Women's Day on Sunday, the 8th, which felt like a really good moment to speak to you, as you've spent years not only building a different model of legal work through Obelisk, but also championing women's progress in the profession through the First 100 Years project and wider. Without starting with a massive question, I like the way that you've changed the first 100 years into a forward-looking project. So could you potentially just talk us through that? What are you trying to achieve with it now?
So we, I guess when we started the first 100 years, that was very much about celebrating the past and giving women a sense of, the legacy they're building on. And obviously part of that research, we discovered about, numerous obstacles women used to face, lots of stories, but also we discovered that most of the kind of breakthroughs have been in our lifetime in the last kind of 30, 35 years, which is why we had such a rich history we could collect, because a lot of the women first were still around, so we could record their stories. But I guess with the next 100 years we wanted to continue the research. We wanted to understand and investigate some of the obstacles and whether they're still valid or whether they shifted. I think we wanted to create something that's more data-driven, more research-based, taking the temperature more regularly around issues around women in law. And ultimately, to be honest, I think we wanted to tell the story that we've moved away from the kind of first one and only woman in the room to, I always say a kind of rock band of women, right? So there's many more women and there's power in that number. And I guess we wanted women to understand that the next 100 years, well, at least the foreseeable future in the next 100 years, is very much a female-dominated legal profession that requires a reimagining of the legal landscape and also how we work and a lot of the systemic barriers that maybe the first did face, but our generation should be able to reshape because of the majority being female. So it was a kind of combination of continuing to celebrate the achievements of women, to also celebrate first, because we still have first coming up, right? So we had the Lady Chief Justice in 2023, the first time in 100 years. So the kind of the history is still being made in front of our eyes, so we want to continue to celebrate, but also we want to kind of, if you like, bust some of the myths about obstacles that are no longer there. We shouldn't fight those battles, and help women to be more strategic and use that kind of knowledge about the past, the achievements they've accumulated through their professional lives, and use them to really know and articulate what they want the future to look like, and then go and build it.
Wow, so exciting. You mentioned there some of the misconceptions about the obstacles. What would you say some of those misconceptions are?
Well, I think that's a kind of sense that everything that used to be an obstacle continues to be an obstacle. I think maybe they take different shapes. Obviously sexism and inequality at work before legislation came in was very in your face. So people would say, we do not recruit women because they're women. That's not possible. So obviously certain things maybe are more veiled, more difficult to read. One thing that remains still too prominent is obviously sexual harassment and the way women are treated in the workplace. So the way it's carried out may be different. but it's still an obstacle that I think is a very valid one, as is a gender pay gap. There's still a pay gap irrespective of seniority. It starts from the very beginning. Somebody starts into practice, and it seems to be something we're struggling to shake off. So those are kind of, obstacles that we had and continue to have in a slightly different kind of interpretation, if you like, but they're very much valid. But there are things that, as I say, that would be outright told to women. We have a woman that we've recruited. We don't want to top it up with another woman, for example. It used to be an obstacle that was just said like that. Briefs in chambers never really being investigated, for example, where they go, and women ending up with kind of women's work. There was often an assumption, even when women were succeeding in, say, the commercial bar, if they want to go to become judges, they would be put in the family courts, although they've never done family work because they were mothers and women. So there was a kind of, a woman's place is a certain place, and, we're just position women in that kind of more societal role. So I think a few of these big things are no longer true, as is the fact that, it's rarer and rarer to find yourself the only woman in the room. It's still happening in transactional teams, in very kind of certain sectors, like private equity or, some finance areas. But generally speaking, when you go and you work with clients who are in-house, it's more often than not that you will be dealing with a woman at the other end, a woman client that you may be able to talk to around, certain kind of timetables and things. Obviously, because of COVID, how we work and where we work has changed. Obviously, we're seeing a shift at the moment, but still, the idea of asking to work in a different way, it's not as problematic as it used to be. So I think there are, major shifts in a positive way that women can capitalize on, as long as they understand what it is the longer term game plan, what is the strategy, what is they want to achieve. I think we still have obstacles moving between layers of promotion. It's still not clear what it takes to be a woman partner. How do you make it there? How are you being assessed in a way that is not gendered? And we still have this kind of issue around women having to be extraordinary to achieve what maybe is ordinary for men, let's say. But these are discussions where I think it's about educating all those involved that actually, by sticking with old practices, they're losing our long term. So it's not worth, continuing without kind of being more open-minded, not least because AI is here. So it is posing huge challenges for everybody in the legal profession, irrespective of gender. So I think the next 100 years trying to lift the kind of sticky, stubborn, long-term obstacles that seem to be very difficult to address, and tries to go under the bonnet a bit deeper into understanding how do women in law actually feel, because very often they're not being asked, and then going after assumptions and saying, well, these assumptions around women are not correct, because actually also let's match the expectation, the ambition to then the reality of what we offer them. So trying to always kind of be on the same page, I guess, is the aim.
And you mentioned that you'll be taking a more data-driven approach. So I think that's, incredibly important. How would you encourage women to either share their experiences or take part, so that the data that you are collecting kind of does accurately reflect the true situation today?
Yeah, so since 2019, we've been doing an annual survey, at least one annual survey, sometimes more than one. And we always launch them around International Women's Day because the interest is heightened at that point. In 2019, we did a very kind of broad survey because it hadn't really been done before in a kind of grassroots way around, how women felt, 100 years on. So it was more of a kind of centenary look back to look forward. And then obviously COVID struck, and we did a few surveys linked to, how women were disproportionately affected in a negative way by the pandemic and, homeschooling and, carrying out all the housework and more. And they were really, if you like, a red flag to how quickly the time can erode a lot of the progress, So it was a very useful kind of reminder that progress is not something that we can take for granted. And every year the survey tries to address a theme that is maybe, we think, more affecting women, but we want to challenge the assumption, So this year the theme will be well-being, women and well-being. So is this something that, are there certain things like, obviously we know about the menopause, pregnancy, whatever, all these things are kind of women health issues. How are they playing out in the workplace, and how are women feeling that are being supported and impacted or not understood at all? Because, we might have a menopause seminar and, lots of women turn up, but if the workplace doesn't really understand how certain things or certain behaviors might be affected by the condition, let's say, and there is no allowance being made for that, then you still end up with no positive assessment of that person's contribution. You can always chip away from the achievement if you want, right? So in any case, we don't know what the findings will be, but it's exciting to go out with something that's very narrow in its focus. I mean, it's narrow in the sense that it's not just about legal practice, it's about well-being in the legal workplace, to see how women respond. And we've carried out recently also a study into AI and whether women are being left behind by it. So a lot of work is carried out around bias and, gender bias and stuff. But I think the lack of time, and therefore the lack of being able to be on top of the new technology because you haven't got the time to kind of stay ahead, could also end up leaving women behind, or, not thinking how to reskill a very, expert skill set. So we're looking in kind of, different angles and sometimes blind spots, if you like, of the sector, to see whether we can see some big themes or big ideas that can come out and then help shape some recommendations.
And if firms are thinking about tackling policies, like you said, menopause is a huge issue, amongst other issues such as caregiving and like you said, time to invest in upskilling. If they were starting to think about that, where would you advise that they begin?
I always say to firms, because they ask me often to support with kind of ideas, and obviously because of the charity's work, I always start by saying, speak to the women themselves. You would be surprised how often people make policy based on what either best practice they heard of and they're trying to incorporate and impose it, and they say, well, I've done the policy. But that's great, because the policy is only as good as it's being used. So if people don't really understand, or they don't believe that your policy is anything but something on a shelf, then actually that's not success. So for me, it starts by really understanding where are the women in your firm and being honest about, are you really paying them equally? Have you done the analysis? Because the data is there. All HR departments can tell you if there is a gender pay gap, because you can, well, I mean, they pay out the salary every month, right? So, you don't have to inform the world, but you can do honest work at home, I guess, and ask women for their ambition, and they often are being pushed back when they express a desire to be partner or whatever. They're being, and it's not just in the legal sector, it's true in most professions. Women are kind of being pushed back, and they say, is your ambition really a justified ambition? Do you think you can really be ready for this ambition? So there's a kind of sense of you're never there, or you're never good enough to be making the next step, even though maybe the facts prove, well, actually the contrary. The billable hours are there, the client relationships are there and everything, but there's kind of sense of pushing back the ambition by telling them that maybe they're not confident enough to have that ambition. And it's a very vicious circle, really, because in the end, what happens, and I've seen this numerous times, is that the women then start doubting themselves. When they express their ambition, they don't have the doubt because they thought about it, they put the hours in, they like maybe some guidance, but they know they want it. After they go for this kind of conversation around, are you really sure that you have what it takes? Then they turn and they basically say, well, actually, I'm not sure anymore. And then they're being told, well, you don't have the confidence to go for it. I've not seen that happening with a lot of men where they're being told that they have to reconsider their ambition. Maybe they're not quite there. And in that kind of way that it makes them turn and say, I'm not good enough to be a partner. So I would say start with the women, and whatever they say they want, don't try to interpret it as something else. Take them at their word, and build a program of leadership that actually is individualized and respects their desire to be a partner. It may be that they don't make it, but don't try to take away the ambition of wanting it. So I would say always start by asking the woman, because then you know where you are, how they really see you, and do it with an external partner, because people are worried about their confidentiality. You can do it in an anonymous way. You can do anonymous surveys. You can benchmark the men versus the women. Definitely, in all of our studies, it became clear that if you're an intersectional woman, then the news is not as great. It's not great already. So actually do the work from the ground up, because that's also showing that you really want something to shift. And then you can change something that you can announce. Like one of the clients we work with, we did the work on the research and we shared it. And they paused all partnership promotions for that year, because they said, well, we need to understand what is happening here, because we are jumping the women all the time. And now we've understood a few things. So let's actually go back, find who the leadership layer is that might be part, and actually start thinking about how do we push the woman too, because we clearly, we've been kind of quite blind in certain corners, not realizing there was a sense of bias, but not surfacing it, but in a pragmatic way. So I'm not a big fan of kind of just giving, very kind of high level kind of, let's have another event or something. That's all very good, because that's about celebrating and seeing people. But this kind of shift from a cultural point of view only happens if you actually go through and start from the bottom up, and the leadership is willing to hear uncomfortable truths.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not always going to be comfortable. And I think that is probably quite an intimidating reality to be faced with. But that was a significant development that you described there with the partnership pause. Where else would you say you're seeing positive progress being made?
Again, I think where firms look at the demographics in the firm, they recognize that actually they have a hugely female heavy junior rank, and attrition and not retaining talent actually will cause problems down the line. There's just an inevitable outcome. If you've got 60-70% of people starting and they're not staying and they're not committing, it's a huge cost for a firm to run through this kind of attrition. And I think the minute they recognize they have a female dominated workforce, then suddenly a lot of the kind of more nuanced help appears, because suddenly you are thinking, am I being considerate of all kind of family setups, or am I being considerate of other caring responsibilities? Am I being considerate of, because in that way you expand beyond the woman anyways. You are creating a better workplace for men and women, not just for women. So you create a more inclusive way of thinking by recognizing that what you have is not what you thought you have, but actually you have a very different workforce, and they probably do want something quite different. And if you start putting it in place, you see the improvement across everybody, because men are fathers too, and they also have parents, and a lot of the pressures and the challenges and the concerns and the worry about the impact of AI on jobs and all of these things are going through everybody's mind. But you can only set up more individualized and more targeted programs by understanding what is the problem you're trying to solve ultimately, and are you genuinely trying to solve it?
You are incredibly busy, I would imagine, with your Law Society hat on as well. What is on the agenda for you this year?
Well, more of the same, I guess, all the other areas that interest me. I'm especially preoccupied by, what the future of law looks like, you know, both from a kind of, people point of view, but also from a technology point of view, and from the end user point of view, because obviously there's a lot of pressure on the kind of infrastructure, which is severely underfunded. We have the AI pressure around, some jobs disappearing and things. And then we have a whole 210,000 solicitors who need work. So, how do you create the opportunity whilst recognizing that we do have to move with the times? And the times are very different, even from when I trained 20 years ago. So it's a different set of circumstances that we need to address. But that for me, it's exciting because that's about an opportunity to innovate and an opportunity to reframe ideas and to have new breakthroughs. So although for some people it feels very kind of apprehensive, for me, I always think in these moments, we get the best ideas and then we have to have the courage to put them into practice.
And looking ahead to the next 100 years, what are your aspirations and your aims for women in the profession, but I guess the profession as a whole? As you said, positive change benefits everybody. But yeah, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, the next 100 years when we set it up, which is coming up to 6 years now, we always said it would be a 10-year project to see if we are measuring certain kind of items, say like gender pay and, certain stubborn kind of sticky points, are we seeing progress in a kind of narrower focused way? Obviously, my hope was also that we will have all the kind of major kind of legal jobs go through the hands of women somehow, So obviously we have a master of the roles opportunity because the master of the roles has decided to step down. So will we have, our first master of the roles, who knows, who is a woman? I'd love us to get the point where the Supreme Court is more gender balanced. We still have only 2 women, but we have a few kind of vacancies coming up, so it'd be great to see that balance. So I think I still want to have that visibility where the perception is that the law is a place where women belong. I still go to schools and people say, well, it's not a job for women, and it always surprises me because it's been majority female for about 20 years now. So it feels like we're not cutting through to make this sense within the younger generation that this is a job for them. And that's a concern. And I'm hoping in the next 4 years we'll make more progress and we'll keep shouting and celebrating and, have awards for women in law precisely to create the visible role models for younger people coming through. I like to see, women not leave and to really investigate whether we are right in assuming that many more women leave than men. I'm not sure, but I like to look at the data and really understand what's driving. If it's true that women leave in higher numbers, what is the driver? I like women who are coming back, not to face the barriers of coming back and, the kind of challenge of you probably don't know enough anymore, you're not up to date, so that they feel welcome, they feel they can achieve again. So I guess, to be honest, I mean, what I'm really hoping for is that when a woman starts her legal career, she doesn't feel there's an end in sight that's linked to, I don't know, caring or illness or something like that, and that they can have a whole career in law for as long as they want to have it.
Yeah, that's a really positive thing to aim for. You mentioned just then that having role models is really important. Is there anybody that's inspirational to you or that you've worked alongside that you would like to kind of give a shout out to?
To be honest, I have to say, after the first 100 years, I feel really spoiled because when I was training, and to be honest, I didn't know anybody who was in any way a kind of big name in the legal sector. It would have never crossed my mind that I'd be working with Lady Hale to put an artwork into the Supreme Court, for example. Or that I would discover so many historic figures that are really inspirational and amazing. So I feel extremely lucky to have met, well, probably hundreds of these trailblazers. And what I love is that I can make my own role model out of them. Because I'm spoiled for choice, I can say, well, I love, I love Lady Hale's generosity and patience, and she's a sharer. She just wants to give, and that's really wonderful. But I love, say, Lady Arden's kind of intellectual curiosity and very clear love for justice in a very academic way. It's a really interesting thing to see how differently you can manifest your love for law. Or Rose Hybron, who is the first woman King's Counsel from 70 years ago and stuff, where she broke so much new ground, but she became a KC with a 1-year-old. And that's amazing, to be a woman leader with a small child in the 1940s and to have made it that far. That's exciting. That means that even then you could, but more now than ever, we should be able to make it. So for me, I love the fact that, if you like, my role model is made up of all these women I read about and I happened to be lucky enough to meet, to take something from each one of them. And that was the whole point of the project, to give people this sense that you don't have to copy a person in their entirety to move forward with an idea. It's enough to pay more attention, to say, maybe they had my start in life, but look where they are. Or, they're the first, but they were not afraid. They still spoke up, and or they were not afraid to change course. Because in my case, moving from journalism to law later, you don't know whether the legal profession will welcome you, and you can actually make the switch and be successful. And when you meet other people say, well, I wanted to be a pianist, but then I ended up, a barrister, and I became a judge. You think, well, so it is possible. Actually, there is no straight line. And I think there are no better experts in careers that are not a straight line than women. So if you're looking for ideas of how we don't go into a straight line and still get to a destination where we feel we made progress, then there's a lot of women around that can show us the way.
Amazing. That's such a nice way to look at it. And yeah, I would really encourage people to our listeners to check out the project and draw as much inspiration as you can from all the wonderful people that are included. Well, Dana, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting to chat to you. I could chat to you for a lot longer, but I just wanted to say thanks for coming on.
You've been listening to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast, brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.